You ever wake up to the sound of chainsaws and realize it's your trees they're cutting down? Yeah, that was my Tuesday. 6 in the morning, still in my pajamas, coffee barely poured, and there they were, a fleet of HOA trucks parked right outside my fence, and a crew going to town on the row of red oak saplings I'd planted just 3 months ago. 30 of them. Gone. No notice. No warning. Just sawdust and attitude. I ran outside barefoot, heart pounding, and who do I see standing there like he's directing a demolition film? Magnus Stormfield, the HOA enforcement lead, clipboard in hand, and that smug little smile that screams, I know exactly how untouchable I think I am. Miss Moorcroft, he says, like we're in court, we are removing trees that violate HOA Regulation 14.7, no trees that will exceed 8 feet in height within 50 feet of any public roadway. I looked at him, then looked at my saplings, barely up to my shoulder, and said, they are 6 feet. Will exceed. You're cutting them down because of what they might grow into someday. He didn't even blink. Just tapped his pen against that clipboard and said, we are being proactive. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just dealing with a petty HOA rule. This was personal or political or whatever it becomes when a small person gets a little power and starts swinging it like a wrecking ball. Each tree was $200, but that wasn't the worst part. They were part of a plan, my way of honoring my grandmother, who left me that land and always said, don't let anyone chip away at what's ours. I'd planted those trees for her. For legacy. And now they were being hauled off like trash. I asked to see the permit authorizing all this. Magnus handed me a wrinkled piece of paper that looked like it had been faxed from 1997, and guess what? The address on it wasn't even mine. It was for Willowbrook Lane. I live on Willowbrook Trail. I pointed it out. His response. Clerical error. The intent is clear. Intent. As if that made it okay to bulldoze someone's memory. But it gets worse. As they drove off with my trees loaded onto flatbeds, I followed them partly out of rage, partly out of disbelief, and partly because, well, what else was I gonna do? Cry on my porch? No. I followed the convoy all the way to Steel Ridge Ranch, which just so happens to be the private property of Cordelia Steele, the HOA chairwoman. And what do I see? My red oaks being unloaded, cut, and turned into planks. Fence post. They were literally building a new perimeter fence around Cordelia's ranch with my trees. I sat in my car watching it happen like I was in a bad Netflix true crime episode. So I pulled up. And I asked her, straight out, you're using my trees for your fence. She looked me dead in the eye and said, confiscated materials may be repurposed to benefit the community. And I said, your ranch is the community now. She smiled. The HOA operates under broad discretionary powers. I wanted to scream. Instead, I went home. And I started digging. I went through land records, zoning maps, old family documents. And then I remembered something my grandmother used to talk about, a boundary dispute with the ranch next door. Something about markers being moved, lines blurred. I always thought it was one of those old lady things the neighbors are stealing her grass stories, until I found her cedar box tucked away in the attic, full of letters, maps, receipts, and one handwritten envelope marked, for emergency use. Inside, she'd written, they stole 3 acres in 2008. I couldn't stop them. But maybe you can. That night, I called my college roommate Beatrice. She's a real estate attorney now. She drove out the next morning, took one look at what I'd found, and said, Del, this isn't about your trees anymore. This is land fraud. Big time. Turns out, Cordelia's ranch sits on 12.5 acres of land that used to belong to my family. Acres that were quietly transferred to her late husband through a shady HOA transaction back in 2008. For a price way below market value. No public record. No vote. Just a few signatures. Forged ones, we suspected. Then the retaliation started. The HOA came back this time with a fire marshal, an electrician, a plumber, all waving emergency inspection orders. I let them in because, frankly, they were threatening legal action if I didn't. What I didn't expect was to watch them create problems while pretending to inspect. Magnus loosened pipe fittings. The electrician pulled wires, then put them back wrong. They were manufacturing violations. And when they left, the box of documents from my grandmother's attic. Gone. But I had backups. Scanned every page. Twice. When I told Beatrice, she said, they just handed us criminal evidence. We're not suing them, we're burying them. But the best part. The next day, I get a call from Evelyn, 78 years old, been in the neighborhood since the 70s. She says, I've got photos from 2008. Property lines. Trucks moving survey markers. Been waiting for someone brave enough to fight. She brought over a stack of dated prints showing Cordelia's crew literally shifting boundary posts in the middle of the night. And then, out of nowhere, Magnus here, that Magnus calls me. Says he's done being her puppet. He's got audio recordings. Board meetings. Cordelia confessing to bribing county officials, manipulating homeowners, driving them out so she could reclaim their land for her development plans. We took all of it, Evelyn's photos, Magnus tapes, the documents from my grandmother, and handed it straight to the DA. Then we called the press. The day they tried to evict me over unsafe conditions, the news vans were already parked on the street. So was Beatrice. So was half the neighborhood. But the real twist. Chief Landry, the local sheriff, stood up during the HOA meeting and said, as of now, we are launching a formal investigation into Steel Ridge Ranch and the HOA board for potential land fraud, property theft, and abuse of power. And just like that, Cordelia's face turned to stone. 3 weeks later, court ruling came down hard. She was ordered to dismantle her entire fence, every board, and return all stolen land to its rightful owners. She also had to repay over $2 million in damages, including the full value of my trees and then some. I watched her supervise the fence demolition herself. Board by board, piece by piece, carried off the same way they brought them in. But this time, on my terms. Now, those red oak planks. They are benches in a little community garden on the recovered land. We planted new trees, installed picnic tables, and put up a sign that reads, Willowbrook Grove, where justice took root. Sometimes, a gate isn't just a gate. A tree isn't just a tree. And a woman with a clipboard. Sometimes she's not just enforcing rules, she's hiding crimes. So tell me, when rules get weaponized, when power hides behind bureaucracy, who protects the homeowners? Drop a comment below, I want to know what you think. Was this justice? Or just the beginning of something deeper? Because where I'm standing, that oak still has roots and the truth always grows back.